Hi everybody, I'm Tara Schmidlin. I'm one of the genetic counselors here at Coriel, and as Erin had mentioned in the beginning, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about your results that we've given you, kind of just walk you through them and explain some things along the way. So you probably recognize the very first screen that comes up on all of your results as you open them. For age-related macular degeneration, we know, just like all the other conditions we've reported to you, that it's due to a combination of genetic and non-genetic factors. However, macular degeneration, of all the conditions we've reported so far, has a pretty substantial component, a genetic component. It's about 71% of the risk for macular degeneration is due to genetic factors, and about 29% due to environmental factors. And most substantial environmental factor, as Dr. Gold mentioned, is smoking. Some of the other environmental factors are things like diabetes, having coronary artery disease. It's been suggested that people with lighter color eyes might be at increased risk, exposure to UV light, things like that that are a little more controversial, but might be other environmental risk factors. To show you, basically the point of this is to show you that the yellow dot represents the one genetic variant that we tested you for. So really it's just to drive home the point that we're looking at one single genetic variant associated with macular degeneration. We know that there's several. Dr. Gold actually had a nice slide that summarized some of the others. And just to remind you basically that we've only looked at one. So all of the risk information in your report was just for the one genetic variant. For this screen, the summary screen for your results, I just want to point out at the top, variant number 1 is actually an internal numbering system for us here at Coriel. So if you were to Google anything and you Googled variant 1 for macular degeneration, you're not really going to find anything. That's just our internal system. And the hope is that we're going to release some more genetic variants in the future, perhaps some of the ones that Dr. Gold mentioned, to give you more information about your risk. So look for that in the future potentially. The RS number is a registration number that scientists give to sites of variation in the genome. So that's a number, if you were going to Google and look for more information, you would find more information under that number. On the details section of all of your reports, you'll find the name of the gene that we did test for. In this case, that was the ARMS2 gene, and you'll find its chromosomal region. So it was on chromosome 10 on Q-arm at 2613. It's just very specific information about the address of that gene in the genome. Just to kind of give you a little genetics 101 overview, every cell in your body that has a nucleus and has chromosomes has 46 chromosomes in it, and that's 23. It's one from mom, 23 pairs, one from mom and one from dad. And then each chromosome is basically a big long piece of DNA tightly coiled, and there are several segments along that DNA, and those segments are genes, and the genes are actually coding for protein products which do the work of the cell. So that's just kind of to give you a point of reference. So the gene that we looked for was ARMS2, and it's on chromosome number 10. The protein name is age-related maculopathy susceptibility protein 2, which is why we call it ARMS2. It's much shorter. And another way to kind of give you a little bit more perspective, chromosomes, we often refer to them as likening them to chapters in a book. Genes are kind of like sentences in a chapter. And then you can think of mutations or variants as spelling mistakes within words. And this type of spelling mistakes that we're looking for in the CPMC are where single letters are changed in the DNA code, and that's what this bottom image is here. So all these red letters, if you compare them to the reference strand at the top, are instances where there's a spelling error where that letter is not what's expected to be there. And actually, on your report, in the details box, we show you what the expected letters are. So the risk variant in this case is a T, and the non-risk variant is the letter G. So there's 4 DNA letters, the A, T, G, and C. So in this case, the T is the one that's not expected to be there and is associated with the risk for macular degeneration. You may have noticed on this result that your result line is actually much bigger, and that wasn't to be ironic. We weren't trying to do that because it's macular degeneration and we were worried about your vision loss. We actually were trying to do that to enhance the results and to make it a little bit more prominent so that you could see immediately what your result was. So for this individual, they have 2 copies of the risk variant, or 2 copies of the letter T at that site. I also wanted to mention the population data box. This information is really just about the genetic the genetic results and how common they are in a population. So we typically, these results are in Caucasian populations because most of the studies are done in Caucasian populations. Sometimes we have data for more ethnicities, we don't. And really for macular degeneration, it's much higher risk among Caucasians. So that's the data that we actually have for this variant. There are 3 possible genetic variant results. You have 1 copy from mom, 1 copy from dad, as we've said. So you can either have 2 copies of the risk variant of the gene, 1 copy of the risk variant and 1 copy of the non-risk variant, or 2 copies of the non-risk variant of the gene. And just about every time we give this presentation, we do have a little bit of confusion over terminology, particularly with the word variant. And the way that we use the word variant in genetics, we use it to mean a form or version, basically. So a lot of people get confused because they think variant means a deviation from normal, which it does. The way we use it is as though it's a different form of the gene. So if you want to read this through, if it's easier for you to understand to read it through, you can think of it as 2 copies of the risk version or 2 copies of the risk form of the gene. 1 copy of the risk form and 1 copy of the non-risk form, if that makes more sense. The next tab of your report is the risk summary screen, and this just shows you all the risk information that we provide on one screen. And for macular degeneration, we gave you your risk based on your family history, based on your reported history of being a smoker or a former smoker, and your genetic variant result. And I just want to point this out. Typically, for all the results that we've released so far, the risk for genetic variant tends to be the one that's down here around 2, a relative risk of 2 or so. And usually it's the lifestyle risk factor like smoking or maybe your body mass index or having another health condition like diabetes that was the most substantial risk factor, which actually wasn't the case for macular degeneration. For macular degeneration, the genetic variant did have the most striking association with disease of the risk factors that we presented to you. And I just want to remind you, we don't actually present to you all of the possible risk factors for macular degeneration. We present a subset. So we present family history risk, smoking, and genetic variant risk. But like I said in the beginning, we know that there are other genetic variants that play a role in macular degeneration. We also know that there are other risk factors, other diseases, having heart disease, having diabetes. There are other things that can play a role that we just either don't capture very well in our family history or medical history, or that we maybe didn't find as good of data on in order to get back to you. So this is what the risk report would look like for an individual who had 2 copies of the risk variant, two Ts, and they have a 6-fold higher risk than somebody who had no copies of the risk variant. So this is a pretty substantial relative risk for any of the genetic variants that we've reported so far. So based on this result, this person is 6 times more likely to develop macular degeneration compared to somebody who doesn't have any copies of the T variant. If you had 1 copy of the risk variant and 1 copy of the non-risk variant, you still had an elevated risk of about 2.5 times greater than somebody who had no copies of that risk variant. For family history of macular degeneration, we gave you family history based on having a first-degree relative. So when you filled out your medical and family history questionnaire, if you told us in your family history questionnaire that you had either a parent, a sibling, or a child that had been diagnosed with macular degeneration, probably not so much a child given the age of onset, but a parent or a sibling with macular degeneration, that would give you a relative risk of 4. So you'd be 4 times more likely than somebody who has no first-degree relatives with macular degeneration to develop it yourself. We also captured and reported back to you smoking history, and as Dr. Gould mentioned, you have a 2 times greater risk for being a smoker. A current smoker is what we had reported back. For former smokers, the risk is a little lower, is 40%, or 1.4 relative risk for macular degeneration. The next several slides, one of the things that we get questions about a lot is based on somebody's genetic results, if we can interpret or try to figure out what they may have passed on to their children. So we kind of just put these in here for your information to show you how, what the possible outcomes would be. So in this case, we have a couple where each of them have 1 copy of the risk variant, 1 copy of the non-risk variant. So their chances with each pregnancy, they have a 25% chance of having a child who doesn't get any copies of the risk variant. They have a 25% chance of having a child with each pregnancy that gets both copies of the risk variant. one from mom, one from dad. Or they have a 50% chance with each pregnancy of each of them passing on a risk variant or a non-risk variant. In this couple where we have one individual with 2 copies of the non-risk variant and the other individual 2 copies of the risk variant, their only option is to each provide 1 copy, so all of their children will end up having 1 copy of the non-risk variant and 1 copy of the risk variant. They don't necessarily need to go through all these. Obviously, if both members of the couple only have risk variants, that's the only thing they can pass on to their children, so all their children will also inherit 2 copies of risk variants. Do have to give you a little bit of a disclaimer, and this is from the limitations tab of your report, which I'm sure you all read very, very carefully. This isn't all of the text from that tab, but it really is something that we do want to highlight with every report, and that's that the genetic variants, if you have it, it's not diagnostic. So even if you have 2 copies of the risk variant, it doesn't mean you're absolutely going to develop macular degeneration. It means your risk is higher than somebody who does not have any copies of the risk variant. Doesn't mean you're going to develop it in the future. It also doesn't mean you're not going to develop it in the future if you happen to be an individual who had no copies of the risk variant. We only looked at your risk for macular degeneration based on the factors that we gave you in the report. So we only looked at family history, we only looked at smoking, and we only looked at 1 genetic variant out of several that are known and several that are yet to be discovered. And certainly sometimes, not in this case, but sometimes other risk factors like your age, your family history, your lifestyle factors might have a bigger impact on your risk than a genetic variant. I'm thinking you all have probably seen this page since you are here, but I just wanted to point out that we have on every single report a What Do I Do Now tab, and that's your way to access more information on the condition. The first thing is just where to register for upcoming educational seminars. This is also available on when you first sign into your account. You've probably noticed the Register for Seminar link on the lower left-hand side. We also have a button here that you click on it, and we'll open an email box. You can send myself or Erin questions that you have about your results, or contact us to let us know that you'd like to talk about it more over the phone. That's fine too. Click on this button and you'll actually go back to the initial page that you're directed to when you first say that you want to look at your results, where there's information about the condition and a video to watch about the condition. Or if you click on this button, you'll be brought to a screen where you can put in your contact information and the times and dates you'd prefer to be contacted by us and what you'd like to talk about, and we'll contact you via email to set up a time to talk in more detail. That's the Register for Seminar link that's added fairly recently, about a month ago, that you can always check there to see. I don't think we have our next seminar scheduled. That's actually going to be for lupus. That's our next result that we're going to release. The other thing I wanted to point out, if you haven't actually visited this page or this tab on the CPMC portal, is the Health Conditions portal, where you can actually read about all of the conditions for which we've released results. And there was some confusion initially where people had thought that this list was only things that they were at risk for. This is a public part of the website, and this is all of the conditions to date that we've given results for all of our participants. So this is just where that summary information is. That's it.